That
A little bit of a hiccup.
No worries. All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dave Powell. I'm currently Wake Audubon's president. I'm going to give us a few announcements to start off the meeting, and then we'll move into our program. So bear with me. We always have a lot, but they're worth listening to. We have bird outings most weekends of the month. There's two great ways to find them. You can check our calendar on our website, or you can go to Meetup and find them there. We have RSVPs for many of the outings, but not all of them. You can always find them on Meetup. So for example, we're going to Hilltop, Needmore, and Bass Lake over the next few weeks. We also have our monthly bird outing this Saturday, June 14th at the North Carolina Museum of Art. This is a mobility-friendly outing. So it's a great way to get to go birding without any stairs or too much steepness, that sort of thing. And then at the end of the month on June 28th, we have our LGBTQ plus and allies Let's Go Birding Together outing. That is at Green Hills County Park. And you can meet RSVP for either of those events on our Meetup page. We have some other special events and field trips coming up. So this month we are doing Purple Martin tagging, banding 3 times over the course of the month. And so we help manage these colonies. It's at Historic Yates Mill County Park, University Club at the NC State, and at Prairie Ridge Eco Station. And so on June 13th, June 14th, and June 20th, weather allowing, in the mornings, John and others will be out there banding. And so this is an open event. If you attend, we lower down the nest gourds, we remove the nestlings, we attach a small aluminum tag and return the nestlings to the same gourd. So attendees are able to touch a nestling, take photos, learn about the life cycle of the bird. It's super cool. So this is an open event. You don't need to RSVP, but you can find more information online at our Meetup page. And if you have questions, you can email John or talk to him if you're in the room. We have 2 field trips coming up too, one in June and one in July. Our field trip on June 28th is a full-day field trip. We're going to Carolina Beach State Park and the surrounding areas. And the main attraction is the Painted Buntings, which we'll be talking about this evening. And our speakers will be present to help with a trapping session. And after being at the state park, we will check out other areas. We'll be back sometime between 4 and 6 o'clock. We're leaving very early, 6 a.m. in the morning. If you're interested in going, either talk to John, who's in the room today, or email John Gerwin and let him know. We can fit a few people in his vehicle. Other folks will have to carpool. We'll all meet up at the Prairie Ridge Eco Station and go from there. So find me or John if you want to hear more information about that. That's June 28th. And then on July 12th, next month's speaker, who will be speaking about moth diversity, is going to be running a field trip in the evening from 8 to as late as midnight at Lake Crabtree County Park. So you can find more information about that on Meetup, and there's a link to RSVP at the Wake County Parks website. So 2 exciting trips coming up. The leader of that trip is Thomas Reed, who is also next month's speaker. We have a tabling event coming up at Out Raleigh Pride. That's on June 21st. Come by, find Wake Audubon, say hello. We'll be there from noon to 7 p.m. It's down here in downtown Raleigh at the Fayetteville Street District. or you can come volunteer with us. Birds Unite Us. You can chat with festival goers about your favorite bird, Wake Audubon's bird-friendly initiatives, our free programs. Bring your affection of birds and nature, and we'll prepare you with everything else. So if you are interested in volunteering, you can find a volunteer form on the event page in our meetup or our calendar. Or if you're online, we'll drop a link to the form to volunteer. We're looking for a lot of volunteers so that we can do some shorter shifts, and that allows people to both volunteer and enjoy the event. So next up, we've got a lot going on in June. We are supporting the planting of a native grassland at Dix Park. So this is happening on June 21st, June 27th, and June 28th. That the planting's happening. It's just down the hill from the chapel. So I know everybody's excited about the new park, but the grassland is also going to be super exciting. So if you're interested in helping out with that, you can sign up on the City of Raleigh's webpage, and we'll drop the link into the chat, and you can find it again on our meetup page. The last thing I want to announce is that we are an all-volunteer organization. We're always looking for volunteers. There's no special experience or education needed. We just need people with a sincere interest in helping us fulfill our mission. So most of our volunteers spend about 4 to 10 hours a month, depending on the role. And we're currently looking for a few different things. We're looking for a permanent conservation chair. We're looking for some volunteer coordinators, folks to help us with our Lights Out and advocacy committees. And I want to start seeding that we're looking for board members. So our board election will be in December of this coming year. But we are wanting to bring some new people onto the board for next year. If you're interested in joining our board, come find me afterwards and I can talk to you more about it, or other board members here who are in the room tonight. And then lastly, if you are joining us for the first evening, or first time tonight, we have an offer that we always do for newcomers. We will cover the cost of your first year of membership, and that includes membership in the National Audubon Society as well as in the local Wake Audubon Society. If you are interested in taking us up on that offer, find me or Jerry, who's in the room, and we can help you get set up for that. Any announcements I missed from others in the room? All right, well, with that, I'm going to have Jeff come and introduce one of our speakers, and then John can introduce our other speaker.
Well, I think John Gerwin probably needs no introduction. Most of you, he's been on the board for a very long time. He's probably spoke to this group more than any other person, even more than I have, and maybe even more than John Connor. He was treasurer for many years, and then Michi Vota took over treasurer for a while, and then she stepped down, and because no one else was doing it, he's back to treasurer again, and hoping that someone else will kick in and step up and volunteer. It's hard to get good help these days, but he's very familiar with the treasurer, and if you're interested, he can help you learn the ropes pretty easily. John's been the curator of birds here and collection manager before that for a very long time, since I believe November 1987. There's only 2 people on the staff who have been here longer, and I'm one of them. And the other one is our assistant librarian, Margaret Catrufo, who's not in good health and is working from home these days. She's been here about 8 months longer than me, but we're the aging museum staff members. And John got his Bachelor of Science from the University of Minnesota, 1985, I think, and then a master's from LSU, which is on the whole other side of the continent. A very big change in climate there. And then he came here very soon after that. John knows a lot about birds. I wouldn't consider him a birder, and I don't think he considers himself a birder. I don't even think he does eBird, and probably can't hear golden crowns and creepers and things like that anymore. But he studies birds. He studies their biology and their natural history, and particularly their breeding ecology. And if I have a question about, if I find a piece of a dead nestling or something, or I have a question about a nest or something, he's the one that I go to answer those questions if I can't figure them out myself. John has done a lot of work with a lot of different species of birds, including painted buntings, but also he's worked with hummingbirds, and he's worked with hermit thrushes and Swainson's warblers and sapsuckers and a lot of different things like that. He used to actually dress like a painted bunting, and I don't know if you remember or not, but the N&O used to have a little newspaper column called The Look, and I just happened to have a copy, 1997, The Look. This quote will tell it all. I like to buck the trend. I'll pass these around. Too bad for you people online. You're going to miss so much by not being here.
Mike. May end up using the mic. I've got to go ahead and share screen here. Thanks for reminding me, because otherwise I tend to forget. I want to minimize that. Oh, how do I get rid of this? What about the other one? Oh, sweet. Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks for coming out. So we have two speakers tonight. I'm going to get us started, and I'm going to go over some of the history of my involvement with Painted Buntings since really 2006, and my colleague Evan, who's down in Wilmington, will take over. So mine is going to be briefer. Doesn't want to go. Let me see if I can get it to go another way. What is that? I'm going to have to go down here. I don't know why it does that sometimes, but I've had a lot of collaborators over the years. So I've been involved in a number of projects, and these are some of the folks. Just like to point out that this has been a really rewarding species to work on, just because of how many people I've been working with. So you can see here Fish and Wildlife folks. Way back when Drew Lanham was a grad student, I was on this committee with him, folks in different states, and then the folks here in North Carolina. And I'm sure I forgot a few. It's always risky to start naming names. Just a little bit about the bunting. If you were a baby in an egg and you hatched out and left the nest, you would look like this. Not the most dramatic looking bird, but you're a baby, you're going to survive. You don't want to be seen. If you're a boy, you might then look like this, and you can take a look at that one bird with the, see if this works. Yeah, little bit of blue on the collar there. These birds will show some blue when they're a young male. And painted buntings will hold this plumage through the fall and in through the next spring. Most songbirds do not do that. That young bird on the left would normally go through its first molt, and it will look more like either mom, or in some cases closer to the father, but they would not hold on to it for this extra whole following spring season the way these guys do. If you're a female, back. So there she is. The young males often look a little more yellow, a little more green, but they do look like the female. And then if you're at least 2 years old, you will molt again in your second summer, late summer, and you'll be like that bird on the lower left, red underneath, blue head, and a chartreuse back, I call it. And just to point out a couple of oddballs on the right. So this bird, so the color red is And even this yellow green, that's got a mixture that it can be a bit flexible on a bird. So here's a bird that came out yellow, and then the one below, the belly red, but so is the back. That's unusual, but we saw that a few times in some of the birds that we worked with. Nobody really knows why. It's just that in red and yellow, it's a pigment, and they're getting it in the carotenoids, and sometimes things just don't line up the way they normally do. They come out like that. And of course, breeders use that sort of thing with some cage birds, canaries and finches, and breed things and crossbreed them to get different colors. So this is a distribution. You can see there's two groups here. There's a Midwestern group, which is far larger in the distribution, and then the birds on the east, really mostly along the coast. And they're separated, they're geographically separated. There's even some molt differences, slight genetic differences. People think of them more and more as maybe two species. Where they winter is a little different. So the Midwestern birds are down into Mexico, down further into Guatemala, Yucatan, Honduras. But over on the east side, what we call our birds, they're going down into southern Florida and the Bahamas and Cuba for the winter. And I highlight Cuba here on our side because there's a lot of trapping that goes on in Cuba for the cage bird trade. Some of the Cubans just like to have them as a pet and let them go after a while, but a lot of them are sold overseas. And so we don't really know the impact of that because you can't study it. It's too hard to go to Cuba and do anything. We've wanted to, many of my colleagues have wanted to go there and do work, and some have a little bit, but we don't have a really good data on it. So as far as a harvest is concerned, we just know it happens a lot. It happens a lot in Mexico, but there are a lot more birds in Mexico. So years ago, because of there's interest in the bird, we started this group called the Eastern Painted Bunting Working Group. I was the state chair. My colleague, Jamie Rotenberg at UNC Wilmington, we wanted to do a more local project. We did it in North Carolina and South Carolina, and we called it the Painted Bunting Observer Team. We worked with Farm Bill money in South Carolina, had a project to look at indigo bunting and painted buntings, and a little nest study in South Carolina. I think there's maybe one small publication on the nests of these birds and the eggs and the clutches, which is interesting for such a beautiful bird. Not as many studies as you think. We've done some tagging of different kinds. I'll go over some of this, run through a few results. We banded over 4,000 buntings across 50 sites in North and South Carolina. We did some radio telemetry on a couple populations, Kiowa, South Carolina farms. We did some focal work, a lot of intensive work on baldhead. We started getting reports of wintering birds. So we've gone out and harassed some of those. Evan will talk about what modus means. Chelsea is one of my longtime colleagues. She was a technician of ours back around 2008 or 9. I lost track, but she's still working with us. She's been our primary bander over the years. She probably banded more buntings than anybody I know alive. So she worked at many of those 50 sites back between 2006 and 2012. And then she carried on when that project ended as just doing volunteer work down at Carolina Beach and Airlie Gardens. And to the present, now she works with Evan through the Cape Fear Bird Observatory. This is why we were interested. What really got us going is that looking at breeding bird survey data over time. So that started in the mid-60s, and there was a trend for buntings which was downward, and that wasn't, not very appealing. So people in the, and this was southeastern birds. So that's why we formed that group. We wanted more. We wanted better data because the BBS data is a roadside survey and a lot of the buntings are off-road, and we wanted to do a project with that. So we did. When you look at North Carolina data, it's a little different. The trend was up, but it's only 5 routes, and that's so it's not a lot of data. So this is where they occur in the southeast. You can see in North Carolina, you've got to be really close to the coast to find a painted bunting. In South Carolina and Georgia, they're more inland. When they get to Florida, the birds are back along the coast. So we have this 4-state group. we did this large 4-scale coordinated survey. Unfortunately, it didn't get published as a large-scale study, but the people in Florida took their data and published it. So I still have the dream that my colleagues who have the data will get to it, but I can show you a little bit of what we learned. We set out 30 clusters around the coastal North Carolina, and we visited 4 to 6 points per cluster where we would try to detect all the buntings in about a 75-meter radius. Now, I can't hear a bunting, and I haven't heard a bunting for 20 years. Not a painted bunting. I can hear an indigo, but not painted. So I hired people to go out and do that. So we ended up doing 140 points, and we did them 3 times a year for 2 years. So we went from Beaufort to the South Carolina line, and almost every cluster had a painted bunting, and some had more than one. And we treated them as clusters so that we could treat the data differently. Statistically, we can treat the points, or we had them grouped so that we could do different analyses with them. And what that really told us was that things, they were more common south from Camp Lejeune on south. We sort of suspected that from bird watchers, but we really put some numbers to it. And also, there were more buntings than we thought. So that correlates with what that trend from the BBS data showed, with just 5 survey routes, is that the numbers were going up. And in North Carolina and in Florida, they found that the numbers were higher than we thought they were. That was good news, because we're at the edge of their breeding range. Florida and North Carolina, we're the north edge, and Florida's the south edge. Okay, I'm shifting to another one. Painted buntings love white millet. They love it. And people love to feed painted buntings where they occur. And just the way some people take care of bluebirds here, or purple martin, people who have buntings are rabid for their buntings. So we took advantage of that. We set out to tag a bunch of the buntings in people's yards. And so we set up a network. We put out newspaper articles, we radio spots, we advertisements, went to stores, bird feed stores, and we recruited a bunch of people. At our first year, we had about 90 sites, and then we cut back to 45 the second year. The technician was about to die, trying to get, because they would go to a site for 5 hours and then pack up and drive to the next site and try to band the next 5 hours, which is now 6 o'clock, and then go to bed and get up at 4 o'clock and start all over again. It just was too much. She was sleeping out of her car for a lot of it because the sites were just far enough apart. She didn't want to deal with a hotel. We had money for a hotel. She was like, forget it. But we did this for these years, and we asked the homeowners, they could be a part of it. So they could help us with the trapping. We use a cage trap and put the feeder inside. The birds go in. We go get the bird. And they could help us band. They could record data. It was interactive that way. And then we asked them to report what they saw later. We ended up with over 50,000 reports. And unfortunately, my colleague Jamie has all the data. He did not publish it, but I have some of the data from a couple of the 3 homeowners sent me a separate copy of their data. 30,000 observations from just 3 people who just kept doing it for like 9 years. They just kept seeing birds. I don't know what I'll do with it, but it's pretty fascinating. Again, this is where they occur, North and South Carolina, and this is how we set up our locations. This we recruited in the bird breeding range, and I thought, we did a pretty good job. So those are essentially the 45 sites. And again, that's where the birds distribution is in North and South Carolina. A couple of things that we learned, or one thing. So here's 1 year of data. So 2010 now, we've been at it for a few years, and we tallied all the observations we were getting. We had a website too where people could submit their data on a interactive website. And the Florida people were pretty excited because they have birds breeding in the north part of Florida and wintering in the south. And we said, we'll take it all. So they had almost 11,000 observations in 1 year. And then North Carolina, South Carolina. We even had people from Texas. They were just excited about buntings. And even though that's not our birds and not part of our study site, they still wanted to tell us about it. That's fine. And for whatever reason, Georgia just didn't want to participate. So that's fine. They have a lot of birds, but they didn't want to tell us about them. How do they tell us about the birds? Like I'm telling you that we're tagging them, and they're telling us, so how do we tag and what do we tell? So you've heard about, let's talk about banding or tagging. So on your left is a bird with 4-color bands, and it's a unique combination. And we tried to keep it in somebody's yard. Some yards might have up to 30 buntings coming to their feeders. Some might only have 3. So we try to keep the color such that even if they only saw 1 foot, they might know. But after a couple of years, I decided to incorporate a split. So the red and the yellow split is for North Carolina. That way, if somebody sent me a photo and all I saw was the split, I at least knew it was from North Carolina. Because we were starting to get pictures from Florida, and I wanted to know where the birds were coming from. And it wasn't always both feet. And so then in South Carolina, the split was pink and blue. Sometimes it came back red and blue, but it was different. It's not red and yellow. So they're very different birds. And when we got a photo like this, I knew right away that bird was a South Carolina bird. And then this is what people would see if they have binoculars or looking outside through the window. You can see fairly well. And nowadays with photographs, digital photography, people can get some pretty good photos. So even these, they may not look great, but I can zoom in on the computer. I can zoom those in, and I can tell you that bird's actually, that's a silver band over a pink. It's a pale pink now, but when I zoom in, I can see it. The upper right bird is, the right foot is silver over yellow, and the left one is like gray over dark blue. That combination is unique. We put that into our spreadsheet, and it will tell me exactly who that bird, the history on that bird. And so that's the sort of thing we did. And by knowing individual birds, we got some interesting stories from folks. And also, we then asked folks, whether they're banded or not, just, pick some days, pick some time, and tell us some different things. How many birds showed up in a 15-minute period? How many males? If you watch the male and you know it's the same male, how long did he stay? And we just sort of took all the data and just tried to get people to send us what they could. It was kind of interesting. So in 1 year, we looked at the data in 2006, and in a 12-hour, just assume there's 12 hours of daylight to the bird. In North Carolina, the birds were making 5 visits per hour and averaging 2 minutes per visit. And so they were occupying a feeder up to 2 hours, like 2 hours a day, or 17%. In South Carolina, they were slackers. They were going 9 visits to get that free food, 3 minutes, and spending 45% of their time on average at the feeder. And notwithstanding a little bit of statistical, challenges to analyzing the data, it was kind of a crude assessment, but I'll bet you that latitudinally, the birds do behave differently. And that's some of what's going on. So, those are the males. I wish Jamie had taken a closer look. I thought that was an interesting trend. But you can see 9 visits per hour versus 5. That's twice as many visits. And, something about what was going on. Maybe it was the time of year. Things are different in South Carolina. Things get started sooner. And so I don't think Jamie was taking account for the date. He was just lumping all the data, but that's still an interesting trend. And on another little thing that we were made aware of, again, birds in the winter were showing up and we're getting reports. Some of you may have been out chasing one or seeing one. We had a bird of Prairie Ridge show up in November one year. We just happened to be banding and we caught it. So we started looking for birds or taking reports, and when we got a couple of interesting ones because they were banded birds. So the bird on the left, you can see it. I don't know if you can see it well enough, but that band is pink and blue. Now, this woman did not know what to do with this bird or the date, and the next year, the bird came back. It was in the fall, and it stayed all winter, and it left in April, came back. The third year, it came back. It looked like this. And so it was obviously a young male when it showed up, and it molted, and then you can now kind of see it's faded. But you can see it's a split band with blue and a pale pink. So that told me that's a South, and that by this time she found the bird lab, the banding lab. They sent it to me, and I said, well, that's a South Carolina bird. And she sent me another photo, and I got the other side of the other foot, and we figured out it was from Columbia, South Carolina. We had banded it in August when it was a young bird, about 2 months old. And it did a reverse migration. We don't know why, but she said, oh, it's got friends. It brings friends every year. And I said, can I send somebody down? So I sent Keith down, he caught it. The number on the band matched, that was good news. He caught some more birds, put some bands on them, and one of the birds that he caught in Manio ended up in Maryland. Later on in that winter, it showed up. So I got another photo from the lab. Is this your bird? Well, yes, it is. And it's got, actually, this time Keith put 2 splits on it and he put them together. The red is together. So it's yellow and big red and small yellow. And so I said, yeah, it is. And then it's got yellow over here and silver. And so that was the only bird like that out of the 6 or 7 he banded at her yard. But it showed up at this feeder up in Aberdeen, Maryland. This is what it did, actually. It kind of made 2 trips. It went to, we banded it in 2015. It was recaptured 2016, January. I was seen at a feeder in Bentonville in 2017, back in Manio in December of 2017. And then it went up to Aberdeen in 2018. That's a frequent flyer mile bird. This is what it looks like, on a mapping software. Anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. And nowadays we do different kinds of tracking that Evan will talk about, but for a banded bird, that's pretty unusual. And it only works because they go to feeders so much. They love going to feeders, and they're very good at finding a feeder. So here's another one. This bird ended up, one of Keith's Manio birds ended up in Massachusetts right when the pandemic was starting. I got an email again from the lab, is this your bird? And it is. The other side of it had red and yellow. So you can see it's silver yellow, red and yellow on the other side. And we were able to figure out that it was North Carolina bird. This also goes to show what happens when we make an error. The bird's upside down and we have an order. Top left, top right, bottom right. But when the bird's upside down and is reversed in your hand, it can be very difficult to remember which is top, left, and bottom. And Keith had one of our colleagues, Kelly Douglas, was with him. She said, I've never seen a bunting and I've never held one. I want to go. So she went with him and she banded this bird and we could not find the data. And finally, Keith figured out she had put the bands on the other leg upside down because that was the only bird that matched. And it definitely had a yellow-red band. It was our bird. So we figured out, plus, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see a couple numbers. And the guy had more photos and I could see 3 of the numbers and it matched the bird that Kelly had worked on. So we figured it out, but it was all the way up in Massachusetts on that's snow in the background. So, but that's what they do. So we're getting winter reports from all over the years, Charlotte, Whiteville, various places of Piedmont, numerous multiple coastal reports. I'm sure I've forgotten a few. That's the bird from Prairie Ridge. This is likely a part of their normal behavior. They probably are always wired to do this. It's just they're flexible, and those are the pioneer birds that, when things change, these may be the birds that pass on the genes. So how long do they live? We tagged a lot of birds, and we looked at had a graduate student look at the data. Leonie did that, and with Jaime over at Collazo over at NC State, and we did a lot of work on baldhead. We did extra work on baldhead when the project ended in 2012. We kept working on baldhead through 2016. What we do is after we tag them, we go back and just try to recapture them and keep catching new birds and compare the numbers from year to year. Gives you an idea and you build a demographic table. So it gives you an idea. Now, a bird that we banded in 2008, if it's still alive in 2016, how many of those do you catch? Not many, but some. So you have this demographic table and you can estimate with some mathematical formulas how long they live. And we can age them like you've seen in the early photo, young of the year, 1-year-old, or greater than 2-year-olds. So we can get a demographic table. And we estimate that the males survive at about 55%. That's saying that we predict that about half will come back each year. Females, interestingly enough, are a little higher. That is not the typical songbird pattern. I don't know if 7% is really accurate. I mean, I don't know if our numbers are really that accurate, but if they are, my inclination is that that's because of the trapping, because they only trap males. They don't want females in captivity. They only want males. And so if that number is true, my suspicion is that's why. So if you're an adult, if you make it to adulthood, chances are you will live a few years. And so most of our birds were 4 to 6 years old. And we had a number of them that were 9 and 10. just as part of that demographic table. When you're a baby bird, it's not easy. And so only about 25% survive. Otherwise, we'd be neck deep in baby birds, or 1-year-old birds, but most of them don't survive. But the ones that do then tend to live longer and longer. So the bird that, and just to show you an old bird, so that's a mistnet, by the way. That bird is flaunting its ability to not get caught. Bird was reported to us, and we had a colleague in Florida. It was reported from Florida. We could see it was one of ours. We had a colleague in Florida who had permission to band them. We sent her over, and he did eventually catch this bird, and it was a 10-year-old bird. That was pretty cool. So we have a dozen reports of birds that we had banded in North Carolina or South Carolina from Florida over the years. I think we're actually up to about 20 reports just from getting photographs. The digital photography has really revolutionized the ability to color band a bird and then get useful data afterwards, because normally you just don't get reports at all. That and the fact you have bird feeders. And then there were a couple of illegal bandings. So these showed up at a feeder in Sunset Beach. The bird on the left was the first one. And the lab, the women that saw it actually sent a photo to the lab, and they said, "Is this your band? We don't recognize it." No, it is not anybody. It's not our official bands. And my guess is it's people who are trying to learn about the bird for the cage bird trade. That's a young bird. It looks like a young male. My suspicion is they photographed it and they wanted to tag it. And then if it turned out to be an adult male the next year, they would have learned what a young male looks like. That would allow them to catch more birds for the cage bird trade, not having to wait until they were 2 years old. And so I sent Chelsea down, my investigator, and she caught the bird and she took that band off and re-tagged it. And so that was kind of fun. And then a year later, another bird shows up with a pink zip tie on, back at the same feeder in Sunset Beach. So down goes. So Chelsea's been banding in their yard ever since because they have a lot of bunting. So anyway, this time, well, she let the bird go. And then about a week or two later, it came back in. Evan was out of town, but Evan was back in town, and she zipped on down to put a MODIS tag on it because we're hoping to find out where it's going when it leaves Sunset Beach. And so far, we have a few points from, I think, North Florida, but we're hoping it goes like South Florida. I mean, that's where a lot of cage bird trapping goes on. It is a tradition in Cuba, and a lot of Cubans in the Miami area, South Florida area, and they just continue to do it. We just want to see if that's where the bird goes. We don't know yet, but that's what we're trying to get at. And again, the pet trade is. This is what it looks like, when they're trapping them. So this is a picture from Cuba, and these are birds that would be sold overseas mostly. And that's Chelsea. Just wanted to give a picture of her and a shout out because again, she's banded probably more bunting than anybody. And that I am done. So I'm going to turn it over to Evan. I think I'm done. Oh, that's a singing bunting. I wonder, have you ever heard of it sing? Is it? I can't hear it. Is it playing? There it is. That was my point and shoot camera. It's a weak song. That's enough, buddy. Enough of you. I'm gonna escape out of here, and then we'll. And then Evan should be able to. Do I have to stop share? Yes, I do. All right, and then Evan, you should be able to take over. There she is. And then we can just do questions at the end.
Can everybody hear me?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yes. Can. Yes. Okay. Great.
Oh.
John, thanks for really orienting people to Painted Buntings. I'm going to touch a little bit on Painted Bunting life history, and then mostly just go into some of the work that we are doing out here on the coast these days after taking the baton from John.
Hey, Evan,
Oop. Yeah.
I forgot to say a little bit about you. Like
Oh, yeah.
just the fact we've known each other a number of years, but Evan is the co-founder of the Cape Fear Bird Observatory. She did her undergraduate and graduate work down at UNC Wilmington. One was in environmental biology, and then in marine sciences, where for her graduate work she studied marsh sparrows, did a lot of tracking and tagging with different newer techniques of tagging birds and following them. And she's a big birder and also a big educator. Loves to work with the public as well as getting the data, and also knows how to do admin. So we have to do a lot of administrative stuff together, and so it's really fun working with her and having and she keeps Chelsea involved. So it's pretty cool. All right, take it away.
Yes, thank you. John's been a mentor of mine since I started getting
Louder.
into birds. Turn it
Let
up?
me.
Oh.
I'm trying to turn up the volume here. Can you hear it through this at all? Go ahead and talk, and I'm going to try to.
Painted Bunting. Hello. Is it working for everyone?
We
Or-
hear both of you.
Yeah, just talk as loud as you can. I'm gonna
Okay. Usually
Okay.
my voice carries pretty well, but over electronics, it's not necessarily the same.
I didn't have to turn this up. Oh, wait, it turned off.
Oh, maybe that's why. Turn it off.
It turned off somehow.
Try again.
Can you hear me?
It's better.
Oh,
Look at
is
that.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the battery on my microphone is dying, so I'm gonna try 2 more. Cause I've got a couple more. Actually, I got a bunch more in the back. They left a bunch for us to use.
There's no cord that plugs into the audio system, right?
What kind of cord would it be?
No.
Yes, there was. There was. I asked them to give us one. We used to have a cord to plug in, and for some reason they took it away. Try again. Now see what you.
Oh,
All right.
yeah. Can you guys hear me in the room?
Yeah.
That's better as long as my batteries work, and if I have to, I'll run in the back and get 2 more. All right,
Yes. Everybody in the Zoom, I think, is fine.
they are.
Yes. But the room, I apologize if you can't hear me.
It's good now.
Okay, great. Well, without further ado, I will just get into what we are doing down here on the coast. So we started the Cape Fear Bird Observatory down here in the Wilmington area back in 2020. And Chelsea and I have been working with John for a long time, but we decided to try and grow the Painted Bunting work in the time since John and the people investigating the declines in Painted Buntings had stopped their work to when we started up more of our work. There was kind of like a dip where we were just doing educational banding. So we in 2021 tried to add a little more of an investigation to our Painted Bunting work, and today we'll talk about that. We'll just briefly touch back on Painted Bunting species information. We'll talk about the objectives that we have as researchers for the observatory, our current work, some of the movement work that we're doing, and then what we have learned from John's work and where we continue. So, of course, John discussed already that Painted Buntings have 2 subpopulations. There's the East Coast ones over here in this thin band of habitat. And then over here, you've got your West Coast guys, and they have a much larger range. Primarily, despite there's definitely genetic differences, but also the most obvious difference is they molt differently. Our painted buntings on the East Coast do their molts on or near the breeding grounds before migrating south, whereas the West Coast buntings molt at specific molting grounds. So they migrate to molting grounds and then they migrate further to their overwintering grounds, which is a real difference in these two populations. The habitat our lovely East Coast buntings prefer is scrub communities. They love to be near the beach. They like a palmetto thicket, edges of maritime hammocks. They love a good hedge if you've got one in your yard, fallow fields, and then sort of like mixed story coastal forests. The issues, of course, that are facing painted buntings, and we've touched on this a little bit this evening, loss and degradation of habitat. If you can think back to that map that we just looked at, there's just sort of a thin strip of breeding ground that this bird utilizes. And over time, with coastal hardening, coastal development, and sea level rise, we're really losing some of those important areas for this species. Climate change makes everything a little bit more difficult by increasing sea level rise, and then the illegal pet trade that John touched on quite a bit. So we looked at this bird just a couple of minutes ago. This bird has been nicknamed Paw by the ladies down at Sunset Beach where he visits. He was observed in 2020 as a green bird, captured and rebanded. We tried to get him in 2020. He thwarted us. 2021, we got down there. And then in 2024, we put a MODIS tag on him. We suspect that he may be going farther south to somewhere like Cuba or South Florida, where trafficking is greater. And as John mentioned, the birds that go to Cuba are much less likely to return, as reported in Rushing et al. 2020. The other bird that John talked about is this yellow band. It was observed in Sunset Beach in 2024 as a green bird, captured and rebanded by our bunting hero, Chelsea. To my knowledge, this bird has not been recaptured, although I'll have to check back on that. As we continue to research buntings, we have goals of increasing our data collection and reach of existing programs. So taking those educational programs and expanding them to scientific study and adding more participation in those educational events. We want to collaborate with other researchers. And so to do that, currently we are investigating different aspects of their life, occupancy, space use, migration, and overwintering populations. In the future, we'd also like to add some breeding ecology. We'd really like to look into nest survival, fledgling survival, and post-fledgling movement, as well as getting some funding to look more deeply into the overwintering populations. As John mentioned, there are just more and more reports each year of buntings that are staying overwinter, that are overwintering farther north from their historic range, and also going farther west. That's something that we would really like to dig into more. And then we also want to look at plumage and hormones. So this bird in this picture I chose specifically for this slide. This is an adult female bunting, though I think if you were a birder, you were just looking at her, you may guess that she would be like an immature male or a male of some like a mutation. But we find a lot of these, what we call like peach dusted female buntings. And so we would really like to look at their hormones and whether or not that is affecting their plumage. And then we'd like to publish some of that historical data that John's been talking about. There's a lot of historical data associated with painted buntings, and that's just not out there in the scientific literature, and we think that it should be. Currently, we are increasing that coverage. So we're color banding and resighting birds at additional sites. We're doing some point counts along the southeast coast, collaborating with other researchers, especially in regards to MODIS tagging. And then we have, since 2023, done a partnership every summer with Field Inclusive to offer a paid internship for an early career or student researcher to get some field experience with us. We're looking at local movement ecology, and we're continuing our overwintering banding and tagging as much as we are able. So to sort of orient you to where we work and what we're doing there, I made this ridiculous map. So you can see here, these big yellow stars are kind of where things were when we started out. Carolina Beach State Park and Airlie Gardens were where we were doing our educational banding programs. Since then, we have added banding sites to a homeowner's location in Porter's Neck. We still banded Airlie Gardens, Masonboro Island, the whole way down, Carolina Beach State Park, Fort Fisher, Bald Head State Natural Area. We occasionally are lucky enough to get over to Bald Head Island. And then we have 2 locations down at Sunset Beach, one on Bird Island Reserve and another in Sunset Beach proper. We've also done point counts from the Battleship in Wilmington all the way down the coast, and this summer we're focusing on this area here to add some information about where buntings are occurring and at what numbers, and that's all to try to get at occupancy. We're also currently trying to be expanding our MODIS work. If you are curious about MODIS and you want to just kind of bookmark that website for later, you can just scan this QR code. It should take you to the MODIS website. MODIS is a wildlife tracking system. It's just automated telemetry towers that are positioned kind of along the coast and in other places. And those just detect animals that pass by wearing tags. So as we tag painted buntings with these MODIS tags, as they fly south and north, maybe east and west, hopefully they get detected by these towers and we learn something about their movement. Regarding MODIS, our current work includes 2022, where we deployed 12 MODIS tags to help researchers down in Georgia. In 2024, we deployed 7 MODIS tags, including that one on that trafficked bunting. And then in 2025, so far, we have put out 2 MODIS tags on overwintering buntings, and we'll do more later this summer. We've also been looking at movement locally. So we've been using CTT, cellular tracking technology. And that helps us to understand just where they're moving on this little island. And I'd like to thank the Carolina Bird Club and the Museum of Natural Sciences for their financial contributions to this work. We're also continuing to investigate overwintering buntings. I should probably have included more about this in these slides, but there's just so much to go through. So this is one overwintering bunting that we banded at Carolina Beach and then recaptured in the fall. This is a winter only bunting at this site, and that's something that we consistently see with these overwintering buntings. A lot of people who have buntings in the summer and the winter don't necessarily know without banding that they are different individuals. But at the places where we've banded birds overwintering, the homeowners have learned that those birds leave and then come back in the wintertime with the same fidelity that the breeding birds have in the summertime. So they just sort of change shifts. And we really want to know where they're going, but we haven't figured it out yet. Just to recap our bunting work through the years with the observatory, in 2021, we took the baton from John and just started brainstorming how we could increase our work. In 2022, we added additional sites and we helped other researchers with their MODIS deployments. And in 2023 through today, we've been working especially with our occupancy point counts, modus, and CTT tagging. What have we learned over the past couple of years? A lot of the results I'm going to show you are just kind of preliminary and just scratching the surface of the data that we've collected, but I think still really informative. So our point count results from 2023 were boring, super duper boring. Every site that we visited for point counts had buntings. So of course, there's just nothing really interesting that's going to come out of that. And our collaborator at the University of Kentucky has our 2024 point count information, not yet fully analyzed. So this graph right here just tells you that the first, second, and third visits of buntings and detections, the first and second visits, we detected fewer, and the third visit, we detected more. Later in the season, right here in the second visit is kind of like deeply during breeding season, so there's just less happening. And then we detected more buntings at that last visit. Detection probability, it makes sense. The closer you are, you're detecting more buntings, or they're more detectable. Here, we really just, we couldn't tell what the difference was between all these sites. If you look at this graph, you can see that there's a real difference in how many buntings we're detecting per site. But if you look at the model, we couldn't really determine why. So hopefully now that we have additional sites, including sites that had no buntings, we'll be able to kind of dig into that a little bit more. So I look forward to telling you all what we learn after we analyze 2024 and 2025. Our banding results are, I think, pretty fun. So this is new bands per year, 2022, 23, 24, and 25. You can really see that in 2023, when we increased our the sites that we visited, the numbers of buntings that we got really just skyrocketed. 2025, we're just getting started, so we haven't really got there yet. And then our recaps follow a similar trend, although slightly different. The top 10 sites for banding and recaptures, Masonboro by far has the greatest number of buntings that we've been able to capture, followed by Carolina Beach State Park, where we have really, really good success. Fort Fisher, we have 2 locations on Fort Fisher. So Fort Fisher and the Bald Head State Natural Area are very close geographically. We lump them together as one site. Airlie Gardens, really busy. Bird Island, slightly less. And then all of these are sites that we either visit irregularly or are very small sites. The age distribution of banded birds and sex distribution of banded birds is really interesting. So this is looking at data from 2022 to present. And we get a lot more after second year, so fully adult birds. And then if you think back to John's discussion of how the majority of hatch year birds don't survive, I feel like that really comes through here in our new birds versus recaptured birds. Although, of course, we'd have to dig into that a little bit more. I can't say that for sure just from this data set. But this is really interesting. We catch a lot more males, and then the unknowns are from hatch years. You can't really sex them at that age. Oh, is this the same slide? Whoops. Oh no. I think those were supposed to have different graphs in them. So our banding results continued. If you look at just per site, the distribution of male, female, and unknown, and then the differences in age are a lot more even for sex at Masonboro. than they are at some of the other locations. This here, also Carolina Beach State Park. I feel like Bird Island maybe is the one that's a little off from the rest of these. And then at Masonboro, you currently see that the after second year is the majority of the birds that are captured, which makes us wonder about habitat quality. Here, we get a lot more hatch year birds than we did at Masonboro. At Fort Fisher Complex, nice little peace sign. Hatch year and local. After a certain period of time, we just start labeling the hatch year birds as hatch year, where when we suspect that they're very early hatched, we call them local. A lot more males at this site. For our MODIS results, I just picked one specific bird to highlight, and that is Pa, that bird from Sunset Beach. So he was detected heading south on one day by 6 different towers. He was detected in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. The Bird Island Tower is like right by where we tagged him. This graphic is really disappointing when it's just one day of detections. It just goes. Whoo. Do you see that? Yeah. So a couple of options here are that he really did just head down to southern Georgia, and that's where he decided to spend his winter, or his tag came off, or he went west where there are fewer towers. These are things that we really can never know, but it was interesting to get his southern path, and he didn't leave to head south until October 18th. And we have not detected him coming north, though a bunting that we tagged at that same feeder on that same day has been resighted at the feeder. Chelsea's caught it and taken the tag off, and the antenna had fallen off. So the tag was no longer functioning, so we didn't get any of that northbound data. For our CTT results, I have a couple of interesting things to show you guys from our 2024 data. So this is our CTT island. It's dredge spoil on the southern end of Masonboro Island. And these little nodes here, they're labeled node 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Those are like little telemetry sensors. They look like this. They are on a pole. This is a solar panel facing up, and they're just like functioning as like little tiny MODIS towers or little tiny telemetry receivers. And as a bird goes about its daily life, it's detected by several of them, a couple at a time, and that helps to triangulate exactly where that bird is at exactly the same time. And so you end up getting a map that looks kind of like this. And so we've been looking at MCP, so minimum convex polygon. That's just kind of like the dense area where they're hanging out. There are much more refined ways to look at space use and bird movement, but this is just us skimming the surface. So once we look at all those maps and put them all together, this is what the individual bird habitat or space use looks like. So the color, we really just did this like the other day, so I don't have anything more refined to show you at this moment. But these little blocks here, the colors might look like they're related, but really it's just the shape itself is the territory, or like the minimum convex polygon, the main hangout of an individual bird. So this here is where one individual bird hangs out. This here is where one individual bird hangs out for most of their time. This big guy right here, and they're layered a little bit, so you can't see exactly all 14 of their their hangout areas. But you can kind of get a sense of how this island is utilized. I need to really work on the graphing of this so that we can superimpose that on top, and really make it more visually compelling for you. But this is pretty cool. I mean, this one circle here is just like where a bunting hangs out. We were able to capture a couple of second year birds and a couple after second year birds here. On this side of the island, it was much more after second year adult males. We did all males in 2024 because we got kind of a late start, and all the females were sort of in a breeding condition. We didn't want to put tags on them and interrupt or in any way impact their nesting success. But I think it's coming out nicely. We have certainly more refinement to do on the analysis, but pretty interesting. So if you are compelled by this work and you're interested in the observatory, we do an Adopt a Bunting, where it's $35 and you get to learn all about the bunting that you adopted. And Chelsea sends you a friendly email when that bunting has been resighted by a photographer, or what sometimes happens is someone from Florida emails us and tells us they saw a bunting. Rare, but happens like every year, at least one time. Also, for those of you who are not able to make it down on that trip that John's leading to Wilmington, we do have public banding demos at Carolina Beach State Park coming up on these dates. If you and or your family are coming down to the coast and you want to check out the banding demonstrations, these are the dates that Chelsea will be there at Carolina Beach State Park banding buntings. And then, of course, if you want to donate to the observatory, which I have to mention because jobs, just follow that QR code. Again, about the Adopt a Bunting, please adopt a bunting. We have a lofty $1,500 goal for this summer of raising money off of buntings. And then if you are a photo enthusiast and you come down here to the coast, or I mean, anywhere that you see banded painted buntings, if you just take photos of them and you have pictures of birds that have been banded, please email Chelsea at capefairbirdobservatory.org. She is the person who keeps track of those sightings and contacts people regarding their adoptions, or tells you things about the bunting that you photographed, like when it was banded, where it was banded, etc. Question.
There we are. Thanks, Evan. All right. Well, yeah, we'll figure this out with questions. It'll be back and forth. So, all right. Anybody, and we got Megan watching over the Zoom chat. And somebody had a question that I saw pop up, which you can just go ahead and answer. What is a greenie?
Yeah, so a greenie is a bunting of unknown sex. Because the immature males are green, when you see a green bunting, you can't necessarily say it's a female. And so oftentimes if we don't know anything about the bird, we'll call it a greenie. And that's just so that we're not being wrong.
But it's generally less than about 18 months old. Yeah. There are a couple of questions online, and we're gonna, can I see them or in the chat?
Somebody's talking about the Dix Park bunting. John, I feel like we should go get that one.
I know. I think the city of Raleigh will go crazy though. I mean, the Raleigh admin, I don't think they'd let me. All right, where are we here?
Keep going. It was very lively chat. Okay. Let's see. There it was.
Which one?
It'll be from Terry right here. Is it unusual for them to be that far inland? And is anyone studying them here?
Oh yeah, somebody's asking about the bird at Dix, and it's unusual. It is unusual. In North Carolina, it's a bird of the coast. We say if you can't smell salt water, you're not going to find a painted bunting. And so the birded thicks, it's been here in the breeding season, so that's unusual. The birds that Evan and I and a few others are trying to do with the winter birds, a lot of them have been inland, which is also unusual. So you have two unusuals, winter and inland. But but in North Carolina, it is a coastal bird. So, but again, I think it's part of their demeanor to be a bit flexible and wander a bit.
Yeah, there have also been reports that are in Whiteville, and other western places. You can imagine that a bunting with their bright plumage, even a green bunting, is going to stand out among your other winter birds. So people will reach out when they have them, or they'll post them.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet's unstable. They'll post them on Facebook or something. And so more and more often, whether it's because there's more technology or because the buntings are moving, more of them are heading out west and heading north.
And a question about the home grounds for the buntings. The map that I showed earlier on North Carolina, it's within a mile of the coast from about Cedar Island down into South Carolina. When you get to South Carolina, they'll move inland as far as I-95. And in Georgia, they're less inland where they follow some of the main rivers up. And then when you get to Florida, they're back on the coast all the way down to about midway as a breeder. And in the winter, they're in the southern third of Florida on into Cuba and the Bahamas. So that's where. Yeah.
The bunting has been at this year, back in like late April, it showed up again and actually showed up with a female.
Oh, wow.
But it has been less visible this year, but that could also be because the city kind of cleared out a lot of the trees that it hung out in. So it could just be further back where it's less visible. So.
Well, so Matt's saying that the bird that came back to Dorothea Dix this year, it's in the spring, came back with a female, but some of the vegetation has been cleared, so we're not sure what they're up to, but that's interesting that it lured a friend back. So interesting. There's another question about I'm not sure what the word DARA is. Data. Okay. Does the data include the painted buntings in Holden Beach? I don't know. Evan, are you guys? I don't think we're at Holden Beach right now, are we?
Just for point counts, no banding.
Okay, the point count. So, all right. So some of the data, yes, are being included for the Holden Beach. The comment that they're common there, and that's what we learned from our first survey was from Camp Lejeune on down to the South Carolina line. They really became much more detectable. We saw many more birds. Another question, do they breed in cooler geographic regions? Well, not necessarily. I guess it wasn't cool today. It is not cool this week. They're breeding right now in North Carolina, and I don't consider this a cooler region. And they breed all the way down into North Florida. And it gets warmer as you go. And then they breed in Texas and New Mexico and up into Oklahoma. And then they're breeding, I'm pretty sure they're breeding in Mexico too. So, it's not equatorial, but what's that now?
There's a question that just pulled out about how flexible buntings are with their habitat. Somebody who lived in Texas. Eric. Okay.
Oh, from Eric?
And then there's another one.
Where's it, below or above? Let me see this one. Are there?
Yeah, there you go. There's,
Right.
It's Eric.
When I lived in Texas. Yeah, Eric is saying when he lived in Texas, they were fond of Yopon and that the Opine are inland in Texas. They're only on the coast of Carolina. So as far as flexible with their habitat, just keep in mind that we really think of them as two species now. So the birds in the Midwest in Texas are behaving differently with that molt that Evan mentioned. There's some genetic data that shows they're different. So their migration is different. So they're living so differently. I wouldn't lump the behavior about vegetation together. We have to treat the two separately. But one study that was done a few years ago, and I guess now it's been 10, the years fly by, a student looked at early island biogeography, and I mean, like almost like paleo look, and then there was the split and concluded that some of what we see today is a result of the land movements drifting and the geological separation, that it's not biological. And some of what we're seeing, because the reason they looked into it is that the current distribution of the two populations doesn't match the genetics. There's some overlap. And so they wanted to know what that might be, and probably because it's a recent separation, and but it has to do with the geology and the the ocean, land, and movements. So, but there might be some habitat thing going on as well. I mean, on the coast here, they love the shrubbery. So they're in the Opine down there, and the wax myrtle and stuff down on our coast. People that have it in their yards on the coast, when we're on Bald Head there or on Kiowa, buntings are nesting right there with those shrubs.
That last question was to know where to see them.
The last question.
Right there. Yep.
The best place to see one. Well, Evan, the best place is probably, or the easiest, what, Carolina Beach? Or what do you think?
Well, it depends. I don't know where Beth is traveling on the southeast coast, or southern North Carolina.
Southern North
But
Carolina.
yeah, if you are near Wilmington, then it's easy and free to see buntings at Carolina Beach State Park. You can also see them at Airlie Gardens, but there is a fee to tour the gardens. If you go down closer to Sunset Beach or Bird Island, the Bird Island Reserve has buntings. If you just walk along the path, you'll certainly hear them. There's not a feeder there, so the looks that you might get are not necessarily as photographic as they are at Airlie and Carolina Beach State Park, where they have dedicated feeders for buntings. But then, as we discussed, Holden Beach is a great place. When we've been down there for point counts, we've not been disappointed. Really, with a little bit of patience, you can find them all over.
Right here. Does the peach-breasted female have any evolutionary advantage?
All right, there's a question about, does the peach-breasted female have any evolutionary advantage? My quick response is we don't know. What do you think?
I would have to agree. I think
Yeah.
we'd have to look into it and see if they behave differently, if they're bolder, or if there are other sort of differences about them besides just the plumage.
Yeah, that's a big unknown, because that color, like I said earlier in the early slide, where one was yellow breasted and one had a red back, it's plastic. The coloration can change, and in a given bird, I mean, when it's born, there's something about the pigmentation and genetics where it's a little bit flexed. So, but we don't really know. That would be hard to figure out. You'd have to have a lot of birds and figure out who's conferring, who's breeding more or less. Another question about, are there any folklore, cultural stories or historical records involving buntings in this region? I know a couple of little things. For one, I have one of the old books that one of the, some women wrote some really interesting bird books 100 years ago, and then they weren't really known for a while, but now they are. And I've got one, and a woman was writing about the birds of the eastern U.S. It's from like the late 1800s, but she talks about painted buntings in this region, and also that people used to trap them and send them to up north, like to New England. And then when people were done having them in the summer, they would just let them go. So who knows? Maybe the birds got used to flying back south or flying the wrong way from us moving them around for 50 years before the Migratory Bird Treaty Act came into play. Who knows how many buntings were shipped? So they weren't killing them. They just got into October, November and let them go. So that's an interesting cultural thing, even around here. And then I have another book from the Bartrams from 1700s when they did stuff, especially when the sun was up and down from Florida to Pennsylvania. And he writes about them a little bit. So he was seeing them then. The French word for them is Nonpareil. I don't know how to pronounce it, with kind of like without equal, because of the colorful male. Do you know anything else, Evan?
Don't know anything historical or folkloric about buntings, but if there is some folklore about buntings, I would really like to read it.
Yeah.
One more question, and it's this one here.
One more. Does the Western species eat different foods compared to those in the East? Well, I would say they would have to just, but I don't know. We don't have much diet information from the East. Do you know of much? I mean, Paul Sykes did a little, but not much. That was observation.
No. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think probably similar, although different. Like they like grass seeds in the non-breeding season. They'll eat some insects during the breeding season, like most passerines. And I'm sure that is similar across the two populations, but I don't have any specific diet data on hand.
Yeah, I mean, the type of insect, the species would change, but a grasshopper is a grasshopper in both places, but they would be different species. There's this one, the cricket or grasshopper that Paul Sykes was saying down on South Carolina, at least, that when there's a flush of that particular insect, the buntings just go, they know, and they go after it. They'll fly a kilometer if like an emergence of these. And I forget which one it is, but I'm sure we can get it. I think he may have even published a note about it. So, and then there's that non-native grass down there. I forget it, a psalm or something. And when that goes to seed, apparently the buntings really like it. And that's in the marsh. That's a marsh one. Any questions in the room here? We've been doing all online, and y'all have been very quiet and patient. Any other questions here? Jeff has a question.
So far inland in South Carolina, I know the habitat's different, but what's specifically about that habitat makes them go that far inland and just in South Carolina?
Jeff's asking what do we think about the birds that go inland in South Carolina? They go further than any others. That question, we met every few months on our working group. That question came up all the time. Our colleague Joe Myers, who used to be at University of Georgia, he was a federal employee, Fish and Wildlife, stationed out of UGA. He looked at this a little bit, and he felt that they were inland along the major rivers, and then the habitat that was shrubby. And it was also especially where the timber operations were, because when the patches, like when we were working, when I was working on some other stuff through NC State, outside of Charleston on a timberland, they would cut little parcels, 50 acres here, 50 acres there. And then it would start to grow back. And then they'd go over here and 50 acres here and there, but real mosaic. And as that stuff's growing back, it was 10 years before it was the size of some Christmas trees. You know, they would grow back. Those first, especially like from age 3 to 7, when those pine tree or hardwoods were young, the buntings would come in. Indigo bunting too, because we're 20 miles from the coast. But there'd be painted bunting and indigo. And then when those trees grew up, they all left. So Joe really thought it was tied to the waterways and some of the forestry operation. When we were near Manning doing some work, the farms, we had farm bill money, and that's right off 95, Manning, South Carolina. There would be these, you know, hedgerows and tree rows in between the farm fields. And then we asked the farm if we had money to pay the farmers to not farm right up to the edge, but to leave a buffer, just, you know, 25, 50 meters on a side. And the indigo and the painted bunting and the blue grosbeak would just move in. It's what you expected, you know, but they paid us to do it. I mean, we told them it's what they're going to do, but we had to prove it, and they did. And so these fields that had crops weren't that interesting, except the sunflower field. Those were interesting. We had one, and they had buntings all around. But the other fields were where it was the fallowness, where you let the edge be a soft edge and it was shrubby. That's what they like, the second growth in the shrubbery. So anyway, that's what we think is going on in South Carolina. But for some reason, they're willing to move further and further inland than anywhere else. What is that? Well, it's 9 o'clock. Wow, we're right on time. Any other questions? Any online? Doesn't look like it. So, what's that? Yeah, I don't see down below. Oh, thank you. There's a question about, is the lullaby by Baby Bunting a reference to these birds? I don't know. Evan, we need to look that up.
We need to look that up. Who's got Spotify in there?
There's a question, is it true they're originally from Costa Rica? I don't know if, we don't really know for sure where all these tropical birds evolved. There is the sense that a lot of what we consider the neotropical migrants did evolve out of the tropics. There've been some new studies saying maybe not so, and it might be that for some they did and some they didn't. So I don't think we're for sure where painted bunting evolved from. I'd have to look at the latest genetic tree that's been done and then overlay that with some of the other like geography data. We did see them in Nicaragua, and again that would, you know, the western population, but the east probably split off from the west, so they probably all did start. And it may be that the woman that did that work that I mentioned about the geography and understanding why they're overlap in the genetics, but their range is separate. She may have touched on some of that. I'll have to reread that article. Yeah. I'm not sure. Oh yeah. So yeah, and Eric points out that the closest relative of the painted bunting is the varied bunting, and that's a bird in northern Mexico and also in the southwestern U.S. So, all right. I don't know. Anything else? All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. And we'll be in touch. All right.
Yes, I have to send you my graphs.
Okay. We're gonna go.
Bye,
We're gonna go
everybody.
have cookies. All right. See you, everyone.